I'm Dana Denha, and you're watching FYI. Arbor Day is honored nationally on the last Friday of April. It celebrates the planting, upkeep, and preservation of trees. Watch as Ann Arbor lives up to its Tree City designation by adding to the population. Trees are rooted into our lives, and caring for them is imperative to the wealth of our planet.
They absorb stormwater runoff. They will help clean the air. They will provide less reliance on electricity to run air conditioners. So there's numerous studies out there that talk about the value of trees, and especially in today's climate.
The city works with the Elizabeth Dean Fund year after year in honor of Arbor Day.
After Elizabeth Dean died, she donated nearly $2 million to the city of Ann Arbor in 1964. She specifically stated they're for the maintenance, the replacement, and care of city street trees. This event today, it's a recognition of that, of the efforts that the city of Ann Arbor has focused on in terms of urban tree care.
And remember to water your trees.
We encourage the residents to help care for these trees that are planted.
Stay tuned, and we'll be back with more in exactly 30 seconds. Highlighting the impact we all have on the planet is an essential part of celebrating Earth Day. Year after year, the city throws a party in honor of Mother Earth and all she provides to the prosperity of life. Leslie Science and Nature Center is the ideal locale to experience the natural world during Earth Day.
Earth Day is very important because it kind of can jumpstart the rest of the year where, you know, every day we can make it Earth Day. Every day we could be planting trees, we could be recycling, we could be biking, and I think that it's a good kickoff for the nice weather and the support of the environment throughout the year.
We're here with our stations and our volunteers for people to learn and engage and realize that there are other options besides just the trash. And again, that goes back to working with the food vendors and making sure their packaging is compostable or recyclable.
All the fun and festivities were had while making little to no impact on the environment.
On average, we've been able to divert about 92% of the waste from the landfill.
We have some exhibitors here from area nonprofits and organizations talking a little bit about what they do to make Everyday Earth Day. So we have kids activities, we have some macroinvertebrates from the Huron River Watershed Council, and then we also have some live music going on. We have the All Species Parade happening.
Project Grow even provided the skills to making an everlasting garden.
We're showing different ways of keeping plants from freezing, and we're basically our small mini hoop houses. We have a variety from simple things like finding an old window and getting bales of hay and putting that on top to keep it from freezing.
A lot of times you hear about your environmental footprint, and I like to think about the environmental handprint of how you can help. And so maybe that's what Earth Day could be about today.
Many of us hold our four-legged friends on a pedestal, and if that rings true, keep them protected by abiding by Ann Arbor's dog licensing and leash laws. Learn more in this month's City Roundup in 60.
Hello, I'm Rachel Weinberg with the Ann Arbor City Clerk's Office, here to talk about dog licenses. All dogs in the city of Ann Arbor must be licensed. Not only does licensing help in reuniting lost dogs with their owners, but it's also a state law. Did you know the City Council recently changed the dog license ordinance to coincide with state law? Now dog licenses are issued for either 1 or 3 years and will expire the month your dog is due for their next rabies shot. Licensing your dog in Ann Arbor is easy. To apply, you will need a copy of your dog's most recent rabies vaccine and proof of spay or neuter if applicable. You have 3 options for applying. Online at stream.a2gov.org, and we will mail your license. Download an application from the City Clerk website at a2gov.org and either mail it or drop it off in the convenient drop box at City Hall in the Ann Street vestibule, or apply in person. Make sure to check the city website to ensure we're open before you make a trip. Also, please adhere to the City of Ann Arbor leash law and remember to leash your dog in any place other than in your yard or at a designated off-leash dog park.
The beer biz is booming, especially in the Mitten State. The history of this draft beverage runs deep throughout the Great Lakes, with natives and immigrants creating their own flavors and brews to tempt every taste bud. Joining me is Patti Smith, author of Michigan Beer, A Heady History. Welcome to the show, Patti.
Thank you, Dina. It's great to be here. I've been here a couple times and it's always amazing.
You write a lot about local stuff that I think is probably really interesting to you. And that's why I was wondering what about Michigan beer made you want to really delve into the history, because you go deep into the history.
Mm-hmm. So I've been writing about history, like local Ann Arbor history, since about 2013. And I've been writing about beer longer than that. So probably late 2019, I started thinking, this would be a nice time to marry those two interests. So folks might know this, but when you do a nonfiction book, you have to do a proposal. I finally got my proposal together, March of 2020. What else happened? And I emailed it to my editor at the publisher, and he was even like, is anything happening in Michigan? And I'm like, no, and then 2 days later, the school's closed. So the book, I call it my pandemic book, because I decided to marry my beer and history interests during the pandemic.
Well, I actually think that's a great time to release a book, because we were all home, so we had time to sit around and read.
I had planned to spend the summer of 2020 going around the state and going to breweries and going to historical societies and libraries. None of that happened. Everything was shut down. A lot of historical societies are run by volunteers, so you couldn't even get a hold of it. And it's not their fault. You could kill people. So I ended up, I'm still delighted with how it turned out. It's just my research was all done online because that's all there was. So a little bit different than I thought it would be, but a good end result.
Can you give us a synopsis of the book? What can people expect?
Sure. I split the state into Upper Peninsula, Western Michigan, Mid Michigan and the Thumb, and then Southeast Lower. And I started basically, most stuff starts happening in the 1850s when immigrants started coming to America from England, from Germany, from Belgium, et cetera, from France. And that's almost in every case what kicked off the brewing. People were either second, third generation brewers. Some people just remembered the lager they enjoyed in Germany, decided to make it. The exception was Detroit, and Antoine Cadillac actually had a brewer he brought over. So in the 1700s, Joseph Parent was his name, and he was the first brewer in Detroit, brought over by Cadillac to brew beer. So, but for the most part, it's 1850s. You get people coming over. Industry starts coming. You have the mines in the UP. You have lumber all over the state. And what I hadn't realized is that mines were only open part of the year. So the rest of the year, the men had time and money. So inevitably someone would open up a brewery and then saloons would pop up, and then you had a town. So so then it traces through late 1800s, early 1900s. Prohibition and temperance kind of starts rising. Then we get to Prohibition, a little bit like World War II era, and then it kind of stops in the 70s. And then the last chapter talks about the resurgence of craft beer. I call it the next wave of beer, and that's how the book ends.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're reading the book and it's set in the 1850s and stuff, because nowadays we think of craft beer and breweries, that's commonplace now. We all have been to one. We all have tried different beers and stuff. So it's crazy to think there was this long period of time where it was Budweiser or whatever, whatever.
That's what you're exactly right. There was that from the 70s, for maybe like we had Stroh's was brewing in Detroit till the mid 80s, 1985. But yeah, there absolutely a lot of different things contributed to that. Prohibition, obviously, I think there was close to 2,000 breweries in America, and then less than 100 survived Prohibition. Then you had World War II. And what happened was, this I thought was kind of cool. The government actually requisitioned beer for the rations for the men overseas. So they would get beer in their ration packs. So they developed that taste. After Prohibition, people were drinking these light, soda pop. So tastes changed. And that, I think, kind of also helped feed into the light lagers that are like, Miller and Budweiser and Coors. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you like it, drink it. That's cool. But I think just World War II and it all kind of like fed into that taste for beer developing. But now we've kind of swung back. So
you do mention early on in the book that Michigan was one of the first places to try to get rid of Prohibition.
We were we started early, May 1st, 1918, before other states. And even before that, we passed a law called the local option law. And what that let counties do is counties got to vote. Are we going to be wet? Are we going to be dry? Some counties went back and forth every 2 years. We're wet, we're dry, we're dry. Then May 1st, 1918, we went dry, the whole state. And the next day, if you didn't have a backup plan, you were out of business. Like I said, nationwide, less than 100 breweries survived. The mom and pop corner was gone. Those were pretty much just completely gone. Stroh's, places like that had capital, that had money, they could pivot to ice cream, to near beer, to soda pop. But if you didn't have that, that was it. And it took a long time to get back to recover from Prohibition. But yes, we were the first to repeal. So
yeah, Michiganders were over it.
we're done.
Yeah, you mentioned Stroh's too. It's interesting that I think a lot of, when you're a kid, you definitely just think of Stroh's as like more of like an ice cream too. So it's interesting that they're just like so rooted in beer, but when like you're a child, you're like, it's ice cream.
Yeah, Stroh's ice cream. It's like, oh wait, no, beer.
Wait, do you think that, or in your research, did you find that non-alcoholic beer during Prohibition was popular? Because to me, it's like gross. Like, I don't want anything to do with it.
Most everything I read was like, well, thus and such brewery made near beer. It did not go over well. What was happening is there were some brewers making brewers yeast and brewers malt, which right on the package said, this is for baking, not to be used to make beer with. So we think maybe some people might have bought that, but I think near beer, it was like less than 1% of alcohol. And I don't even know what the process was. I think people might have drank it because it was there, but I never read a single thing that said, yes, it was so popular, everyone loved it.
Yeah. You talk about like the Native Americans making like spruce beer, which to me almost sounds like gin or something, but also like beer was medicinal.
If you go back in world history, like I'm talking 4000 BCE, they actually have found stone tablets that have prescriptions with beer. I guess it made you feel better. We don't know. So yeah, in spruce beer, that, when I wrote the proposal for the book, I was like, I want to find, the African Americans and the women and the Native Americans and all these. And I forgot where I was. I forgot I'm in America, and we don't do a good job of recording that history. So I really was interested in what Native Americans were doing. And I just found Upper Peninsula. There's a great book called Upper Peninsula Beer, and that goes really deep into the history of the UP. And it talked about that. I've actually had spruce beer. A friend of mine made it. I mean, it tastes like a Christmas tree. So it was good. It just was kind of Christmas tree. But yeah, you kind of brewed with what you had on hand. So back in the day, like agave was used. Like in Russia, they used rye because that's what they had. I heard maize was also used. So whatever you had, you could ferment it, and there you go.
Perusing the book, it seems like a lot of the beer comes from the Germans in this area.
Mhm. Yep, huge influence. There's two kinds of beer. So if you think of like whiskey has rye and scotch and bourbon, beer has ale and lager. So lager is usually I don't know so much now, but has historically been associated with Germans. Germans actually kind of disdained ale a little bit. Lagers require longer fermentation, more precision in the brewing. You need to have a cool space, like a cave. My husband and I went on the Miller tour in Wisconsin, and they showed you the caves where they aged. So lagers tended to be the Germans. Everyone else made ales. Ales would be like a stout, a porter, an IPA, a pale ale. And it's what most home brewers make because it's shorter fermentation. It doesn't have to be quite as cold. I like them both, but Germans very heavily influenced when they came over. And in Detroit, in fact, there was actually a number of ale makers that turned into maltsters because they couldn't compete with the German lager.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, yeah, they were just like, and lager is, I mean, if you had like an Oktoberfest or a Maibach or a Pilsner, they're lighter, they're kind of like Miller and beer and Bud, and that those are lagers. They always are described as crisp and clean and kind of fizzy and they're good. They're good beers.
You also mentioned, and I really never even thought about, I think I just assumed that people were probably drinking warm beer because I know some Europeans that definitely don't mind drinking beer warm. But you talk about how iced harvesting and how dangerous it was, which totally made me think of Kristoff from Frozen and his iced harvesting ways.
there was a guy I think it was in Ypsilanti actually, and he actually leased a lake so he could get the ice to cool the beer. There's a picture in there of people standing on ice. There's a brief story, someone like passed away with the ice harvesting machinery. It's one of those things I don't even think about because we have refrigeration, but before that, and that's why lagering could be difficult if you didn't have a cave or an underground something. Some people would get ice stored in an ice house, but again, you had to literally go to the frozen lake with your team of horses or oxen, whatever, and you had to get the ice. It was a process. I'm very grateful we have refrigeration. It made me kind of grateful, like, okay, refrigeration.
Yeah, definitely.
Air conditioning, yay.
The other thing I noticed that it seemed like there was a lot of fires that happened. A lot of breweries burnt down.
Yeah. I always say there's like a million ways to die in the old days, and fire was so common for killing people and destruction of property. In both of my Ann Arbor history books, I talk about local fires, and it's like it would start, and most places at best you had volunteers. So somebody would ring the bell, and then Ann Arbor actually had a law at one point that said when you heard the call of fire, you had to report with your bucket or else like go to jail.
So everyone was like the fire department, the whole city.
Right.
Yeah.
And then eventually you started having, kind of volunteer, and then it went professional. But in smaller towns, I mean, if people didn't get there, if you couldn't get a literal bucket brigade, if you didn't have cisterns, if you didn't have hydrants, that was it. And you had to rebuild. There wasn't, we didn't have insurance like we do now. We didn't, in some places that was it. So very grateful for our fire department.
When you were doing research for this book, which you obviously said it was a little harder, which I have to agree. I mean, sometimes you hit roadblocks when you're just searching for stuff online. What were some of those challenges that you had to deal with finding? Because we're dating back pretty far to just be searching online for things.
And I'm actually glad you asked that because it's getting, I want to say a little more challenging to access information. And I say that because big businesses are buying up information. So for example, when I did my first history book in 2014, I could just Google, blah, blah, blah. Second history book, Vanishing Ann Arbor. My writing partner, Britton Woodman, and I had a photo picked out. We were all set, ready to go. Found out the owner of the the photo was the Ann Arbor News, which was gone. Their pictures were bought by Condé Nast, which is $1 billion, right? They wanted $800 to use the picture. Luckily, it had gone to press. So luckily, the publisher helped. I did like a GoFundMe, and generous friends donated, and it was okay. What I noticed this time around, a lot of the same, where newspapers are going out of business. Their archives are getting bought up, or newspapers.com is a subscription service. I absolutely want journalists paid. But the reality is, an article written in 1888, that person's gone. A picture taken in 1920, that person's gone. Their family is not going to get the money. It's not like, it's not like I'm taking an article from 52, and the family of this guy is going to get, no, nothing like that. It goes to this company. So I fear for the future of these books, because, this is not like almost no one makes money from writing, but almost no one makes a living really from writing books, unfortunately. And so what I'm afraid is going to happen is that people are not going to write these books because it's going to be costly. They're not going to be able to afford it. So that was a huge roadblock, is like, I was able to get around it, but sometimes it was like, I couldn't use the picture because either we didn't know who owned it, or it was, they wanted $500. Or the article was locked behind a paywall that was going to be like $50 a month. And I mean, that concerns me. Again, if you actually could go to the library, which I couldn't because of COVID, the information should be there, and God bless libraries that, so that it will be there. But that, again, most people don't have time for that. Like, who is going to quit their job and go, so it does really concern me about what's going to happen to books like this, which I think needs to be written, not necessarily by me, but do need to be written to preserve that history.
And one of the things that makes these books so special that you write is being able to see these pictures of history and looking back.
Yep. Yeah. No, thank you. So the pictures are actually, like I said, as more and more newspapers just kind of go out of business, it's getting harder and harder to access, or find who holds the copyright. And if that can lead to big problems, right? Again, if it was a photographer's family, that's awesome. I'll pay him myself, but it's not. I don't mean to slam big business, but.
No, I mean, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I know it's frustrating. So.
Well, looking back as you were doing your research on the book, were you surprised by anything that you found out?
I love that question, because my favorite thing I found out was about World War II, when the government declared breweries an essential business, which would have meant nothing to me before COVID, and actually allowed them. They kept brewing. They requisitioned 15% of the beer for the guys, like I said earlier. No canning except for the ration cans. Everything else had to be bottles or kegs or barrels. And what World War II did is it allowed breweries to say, look at us. We're an essential business. We are paying our taxes. We are making this, vitamin B rich beer. And it kind of helped with the prohibition, because there was kind of still that leftover prohibition stigma. And so World War II, allowing the breweries to keep going, really helped kind of rehabilitate their image.
Well, before we go, why don't you just tell people why they should peruse Michigan beer?
I feel like even if you don't like beer, the history is interesting. If you don't like history, the beer is interesting. If you don't like either, the pictures are fun to look at. So it's available. Local bookstores have been incredibly supportive. It is available online as well. And if you Google me, it's just Teacher Patti with an I.com. You can message me. I will sign and sell you a copy. But I think it's just a lot of fun to look back and learn about our state through its beer, because I think there's a lot of little historical little facts in there and fun facts that hopefully people will enjoy.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm not a huge beer person, and I enjoyed reading the book. I thought it was a fun read.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana.
So thank you so much for taking the time, Patti.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You're welcome to my classroom, friends. So I appreciate it, Dana. Thank you so much. And let's go all, well, after school, we'll all have a beer.
Yeah, exactly. For more on this and other programs, visit a2gov.org/CTN. Visit youtube.com/CTN Ann Arbor to see all that we have to offer. And remember to like, subscribe, and ring that notification. Thanks for watching and tune in next time to FYI.